On today's episode, I'm actually going to be reading an article for you that I wrote myself on the Coalition. It's about the game industry. It's whether the game industry is actually going to die or not, if it's going to suffer from another crash. I'm really bad at reading, by the way, so I apologize if it sounds like I'm reading because I clearly am. But this article really does come from the heart, and I worry very much about the practices that the industry is putting themselves through right now in order to make an easy dollar. And yeah, just tell me what you think about it. I really want to know your thoughts on the industry and where it's going. And I really hope that you enjoy this episode and this article. There are going to be many more to come in the future. So, do you ever wonder what the gaming industry would be like without microtransactions, season passes, or loot boxes? Or wonder how the industry would look if many of our big budget publishers and big name developers put more care and time into their AAA games rather than just focus on the bottom line, rolling out sequel after sequel of, what's safe or easy to sell. I was thinking about this one day and found myself like in a rabbit hole of how drastic the gaming industry has changed since the 90s and the early 2000s compared to now, and how gamers are slowly becoming jaded, cynical, and sometimes downright like fed up with certain industry practices. Multiplayer back then was couch co op, LAN parties. Real public consumer online gaming was just getting started in the late 90s, early 2000s with PS2, N64, Dreamcast, and Xbox. Though many did fail in that realm since they rarely had any supporting software for their modem add on hardware. When Xbox came into the picture, they solidified gaming for future generations. Now that multiplayer is practically essential for many genres, we have more games than ever. 3.2 billion players, making the industry over $184 billion. Now, before this opinion piece continues, understand that I see this as a business first, but gamers can be very vocal about what they care about. I think developers and publishers should care just as much when it comes to how they present their games and their quality. It seems this last decade or two, the passion for making games is kind of dwindling and replaced it with mostly the lust for making more money. This is all while finding ways to release more games with less work and driving developers to the ground with crunch time and unrealistic release dates. Also, keep in mind, I don't single out any developer or publisher. This is just what I see from a variety of companies. Microtransactions have been around for quite a while before games like Fortnite, Call of Duty. They dominated online multiplayer. Gamers have dealt with that kind of cold hand of publishers reaching out for our wallets by giving us horse armor in Elder Scrolls or true ending DLC of Asura's Wrath for absurd, insulting amounts. Yet there are those whales that just cave in and give their wallets to the microtransaction gods in exchange for a game they might not even play much longer. This is what drives the gaming economy now. The hope that those with pocket money will cave in and buy what they're selling. Unfortunately, it's not just microtransactions that are the problem. There are primarily two areas I've observed that worries me about the game industry and the future. Firstly, it's insatiable increasing greed by way of these microtransactions. And secondly, its penchant for releasing unfinished, unpolished games. With those in mind, I want to break down both and explain why they're creating an unstable industry, not for their businesses, but for their gaming communities and demographics. I think they're feeling safe with their increasing wealth, but as we all know, industries can crash if they're not careful with their consumers. With the boom of multiplayer focused games, EA reportedly said Single player games are finished. This is by sites by Destructoid, Wired, and Games Radar 12 years ago. This brought up a huge debate as to whether it was true or that this was just a push the industry was taking to make more money with online play features and content such as skins, loot boxes, maps, weapons, etc. I believe EA and others like them wanted this to be true and tried their best to make that happen with games like Battlefield, Battlefront, Call of Duty, Apex, so many more games that they've been milked to all hell. Even though microtransactions have been around for a long time, the success of Fortnite and Call of Duty multiplayer, in my opinion, started the popularity and the toxicity that is microtransactions and battle passes. You can even involve games like Overwatch and Star Wars Battlefront to that mix as well, adding gambling of loot boxes. I feel that everyone has their vices in gaming. Sometimes it's cool weapon skins, character creation, freedom, etc. Everyone wants to show off, somehow. I'm guilty myself of putting in like thousands of dollars in Destiny's microtransactions in the past 10 years. It's full of skins for everything you could think of, plus shaders, mounts, their season passes. At the same time, I'm not blind to my impulses failing my bank account. I'd hope most others can acknowledge the same as a first step to the problem as well. That being said, it's no wonder other countries banned or regulated loot boxes in gaming now. Japan, Belgium, Netherlands, China, UK, and more have all been involved in some way about the practice of preying on our urge to hope for the right loot drop, then spend more money when we need that fix of dopamine again. Now that we have those regulations and bans, one problem was solved, but has caused a ripple effect in the industry. How do we make players spend more money while not using loot boxes to rely on? Add more microtransactions, of course. Skin the game down to its bare bones and drip feed content so players can want more. I'll be the first to admit that Bungie's Destiny franchise needed this business model solely because they required more funding. One developer with little to no publishing support needs constant flow of money to keep live service games, alive. I understand that. I have noticed, however, not all games need this. Call of Duty is an annual, if not biannual release, yet gamers still flock to their battle passes and microtransaction business model. A consistent feeding of the same content, aside from a few changes in mechanics or graphics. What keeps this cycle going? New, young gamers that have never played a previous iteration, turning them into avid, fervent fans. The same can be said for many sports games like FIFA or 2K or wrestling games. It's the same thing with minor changes in mechanics, features, or the roster. Fortnite at its initial release made sense. You buy the game once, then it's a continuous evolution of content. Now the game is free and solely relies on the constant content cash flow with microtransactions. I really want you to understand that in no way I'm saying any of these games that I mentioned are bad games. I think they're amazing, and I played many of them. What I'm trying to bring to light is the preying practices that these companies have turned to so they can increase their publishers' bank accounts. It's not about the games or the gamers. It's about the sales and only the sales. The addition of the word only is what gamers have been feeling for quite a while, and that is what began this rant about the industry's future. Games are getting ridiculously expensive to make. Millions of dollars are put in, and publishers expect not only their money back, but profits for the work. They have to spend on marketing, development, distribution, licensing, taxes. So much goes into these games that many don't know or think about it. My question is, why does it have to be the way of live service only games to make the industry lucrative? Making so many multiplayer games or even single player games, those experiences, all with microtransactions. Multiplayer games like Remnant from the Ashes, It Takes Two, the Division series, and Outriders were all hits that had little to no microtransactions and continue to be played and purchased. Why do games like Deus Ex Mankind Divided or Middle Earth need them? They're supposed to be single player experiences. What are we trying to show off on these games? What are the long term gaming benefits from them? Granted, this single player practice is fading, but it shows what lengths company will go to for another buck. Giving gamers choice on how to spend their money isn't the problem. It's just good business. It can, however, sometimes reduce the quality of a potential blockbuster game, all because developers have to strip the game down to nothing so people will buy what should already be in the game. A reduction in quality or constant repetitiveness in iterations of a series can severely impact or subvert gamers' perceptions. This is where the deterioration of the industry's soul is showing. This is what brings me to the next core problem of the industry as well: quantity over quality, speed over superiority. I'm talking about the downfall of value while prices rise. Is this game worth getting? This is one of the questions all gamers ask when they see the hype of an upcoming title. Every gamer has their preferences, of course: graphics, story, game mechanics, music, long term playability. It's all above everything else. It's a balance that's really difficult to master, even for the most seasoned developers. This puts a lot of pressure on developers and publishers alike to make sure a game is worth making and worth continuing to make despite delays. Delays, like Thanos, are inevitable. If you want quality, you have to wait for near perfection. I don't think publishers feel the same way sometimes once the budget starts to rise and gamers start to raise their torches and pitchforks on social media for a million reasons. So many people, I myself included, feel that publishers only care about how much money they make. So, of course, they're going to get it when the getting's good. Any business would fail if they didn't think of how to bring in that moolah. But there also should be that balance of caring for consumers and holding on to their fan base rather than just finding ways to grind cash from new, younger consumers. Developers are the soul of the industry, so they're the ones making what you love. Not to say that some can't be greedy as well, but we all know a majority of their staff want to make games they can love as gamers themselves. If they could add every single idea they had to make the game better, they would. Those aren't realistic goals, though. There are deadlines and budgets to account for. That's where the love can be lost sometimes. Way too many games lately are being rushed and thrown to the wolves simply just to recover the costs. Delay after delay, the budget will understandably begin to rise. Developers and publishers have to act now and make tough decisions. Delay the game with possibility of the hype dying, or releasing it broken and unfinished. Probably with the hope that it'll be a hit once that dreaded, quote, first patch arrives to fix what should have already been implemented in the first place. Sometimes games have cut content and then it's released as DLC because they couldn't fit it during the initial release time. I've lost track of how many games, whether it's a hit or not, comes with a day one patch, a week patch, a patch every month, hot fixes, etc. The technology we have now to update games should be a blessing, a convenience, not a crutch. Look at Batman Arkham Knight, for example. Decent game overall, but failed to come properly fixed for its PC release. It's an issue that was known since day one. Assassin's Creed Unity was a hot mess of bugs because they had to release a game every year. It took years to realize that not only an annual release was wearing gamers down, but it wasn't sustainable for future iterations. Duke Nukem was a legendary example of how unpredictable games can be when it comes to delays in quality gaming. So many took the reins on that game. It became like a jumbled mess of bad jokes, gameplay, and graphics. It essentially missed its core generation by 20 plus years. But they had to release it in hopes that the hype was still there and to make up for its lost money. If you want recent examples, the GTA trilogy was a disaster. Fallout 76 was a clear case of greed, miscommunication, and mismarketing. Aliens Colonial Marines was a travesty, and Pokemon Scarlet, Violet, and Arceus was divisive to its fan base. The funny thing is, no one is safe from the decision to release unfinished or delay for the millionth time. CD Projekt Red is now infamous for its Cyberpunk 2077 release after decades of quality games from the Witcher franchise. They failed to keep gamers and the media involved in their progress and even blocked reviews and limited gameplay previews to avoid an inevitable backlash from an incomplete mess. So now what about finished games? Saints Row was a beloved franchise for many, and the remake came out as a lifeless cash grab game, using the name alone to sell copies and pander to a new generation of young gamers. Gotham Knights was divisive, 4 characters to play as, yet it's only a 2-player co-op. Then Warner Brothers Games Montreal announced a 4-player co-op amidst the cries of fans, just not co-op for their story campaign. This really confused gamers. Some enjoyed what it had to offer, others thought it was a shell of an Arkham game. Then there's games as recent as Callisto Protocol. The hype gamers had for this one. This was by the few original developers of Dead Space, the blockbuster series that revived survival horror. It took all but 2 to 3 hours of my playthrough to see how little love this game had been put into just to mimic the success of Dead Space. It's a finished game, but another shell simply released way too early. Rumors are that it was released so quickly so that it can beat the release date of the Dead Space remake, but those are not confirmed yet, but I believe it. With everything mentioned about online gaming, microtransactions, unfinished or mediocre games, I worry where the industry is headed next. What is the next shift in gaming to make a quicker buck? These games are now multi-million dollars in budget, but there's no excuse as to why it shouldn't be a full, finished, quality game every single time. Now, preferences in what you consider a good game is debatable. Not everything is going to be a hit because not everyone likes everything. So many can love multiplayer compared to single player, story versus graphics. That's just an example. With the games mentioned before, though, you have to admit the industry is headed somewhere dark if they don't change their mindset. So I got to leave this piece on a good note. There are amazing games out there recently, games that show how much love developers and publishers put into them. Funny enough, most of them are single player experiences, which shows a game can be successful without microtransactions and a season pass. Games like Sony's Spider-Man, Star Wars Fallen Order, Ghost of Tsushima, Elden Ring, Last of Us, The Witcher series, Hi-Fi Rush recently, High on Life, Monster Hunter, Red Dead Redemption 2, the Dead Space remake, and even more recently, the Hogwarts Legacy game. Now games are $70 to make up for the rising budget of games and hardware. This in itself is a divisive topic, but I wholeheartedly support this change with a caveat. That is, raise prices, but ensure a finished quality product. I don't want to buy a $70 game and it's 2 hours long, or it's a bare skeleton, but I have to spend $5,000 worth of content to enjoy the game, or lie about what the game is and market it as if it was the end-all be-all of video games. I'm looking at you, No Man's Sky. Keep in mind, I'm in no way attacking a particular developer, publisher, genre, or game title. Some have learned about these practices and some have not. I know No Man's Sky, for example, the devs have learned their lesson and have created amazing content now, and most of it was free. There are only so many games that can run through my head to use an example while keeping everything professional and subjective. With everything said, do I believe the game industry is dying? Will there be an inevitable crash? If these trends continue to get worse, absolutely. I can see in the next 10 to 15 years, prices will rise in games and hardware, and not so many will buy them. What would be the point if the game comes broken, or if I have to buy a season pass, or rely on patches to fix it day one? Live service games can also be difficult to play with bad internet connections, or if developers' servers go down. Then there's, of course, a problem of losing your game if they take down servers. For example, Marvel's Avengers. The game is going offline, and the entirety of their microtransactions are now free. After all these gamers spent time and money on it, that I'll just wait till it gets cheaper mentality will become more common if these practices continue. So, do I have a solution? No. I'm just ranting and observing what I feel and I know so far. I love the industry, the artistic, business, and entertainment aspects. I don't want it to die. I don't see it getting better though, with all these developers being bought off, publishers fighting over exclusivities, companies getting so large they can't or won't even track compliances in their harassment policies. Crunch time is damn near forced labor. So, what do you think of it all?